What's the creepiest thing you've ever witnessed? I was living in a rental house 10 years ago. The back door was leading to a narrow enclosure, adjacent to which was the neighbor's house, and their bedroom was right next to it. There was a light bulb socket in that small backyard, but I never used that place for anything, so I never put a bulb there. At night that place always remained very dark. One day my neighbor told me they could hear movements in my backyard, like someone jumping down from the wall onto the concrete ground. They said it happened on multiple occasions and they think it was probably a thief. So I bought a compact fluorescent bulb and went to put it there. The socket was very high and I had to stand on a tall wooden stool to reach it. That night before I went to bed I switched it on. The switch to the bulb was inside my house, and checked the backyard, which was now fully illuminated. The next morning I didn't go to the backyard and just switched off the light before going to work. On the second night, when I switched it on again before going to bed, there was no light, it remained dark. I tried multiple times but there was no light. I thought the bulb was defective but was scared of the dark and the thief, so I didn't go to check that night and decided to check it in the morning. When I went there in the morning the bulb was not in the socket. First I thought the thief stole it, but then I saw the bulb was on the ground completely undamaged. There was no way it could have survived a fall from that high, and why would the thief not take the bulb with them? I took the bulb inside and checked, and the bulb was working fine. I put the bulb back in the socket and went to work. It was the third night and when I switched on the bulb it was working. I went to bed. Around 3 a.m. I went to the back door and slightly opened it to see if the bulb was still working. It was pitch dark. I closed the door quickly and went to sleep. Next morning I found the bulb on the ground again, undamaged. I avoided going to the backyard as much as possible from that day and didn't attempt to put any bulb there again. There was no incident of theft in that neighborhood as far as I know. When I was about 6 or 7, I woke up in the middle of the night to a faint sound of what seemed like someone stacking plates in the kitchen every couple of minutes. With the location of my bedroom door giving me a direct view of the kitchen entrance and part of the kitchen, I opened it and peeked my head out to see what was going on. To this day, I swear I remember just seeing some old woman, sunken eyes, gaping mouth, completely wide open, head turned almost 90 degrees just staring at me, not even moving. What's even more frightening is the sound suddenly stopping as I did this. While I'm sure it could have just been my eyes struggling to adjust and merely seeing shapes, the longer my eyes adjusted, the more vivid this person became. I just remember staring right back, not moving, for what felt like several minutes. I decided to make a break for my parents' bedroom, which was across from my bedroom. I told them what happened, and they checked and confirmed nothing was there. Fortunately, we were scheduled for an early flight to visit family, so everyone decided to get up. I'm sure it could have just been my young mind playing tricks, nevertheless, I'll never forget that face. Okay, so this isn't something that I personally saw, but I got quite a few reports about it while working as a camp employee, and the reports definitely creeped me out. It was a summer camp up in the mountains that I worked at for a couple summers as a teen. Kids attending the camp would sometimes make up stories about seeing Bigfoot or a ghost out in the forest, typical dumb kid stuff. But there was one type of story in particular that I kept hearing, from different groups over several months each summer, which had me a bit worried. The first time I heard of it was from one of the older camp employees recounting a story from many years prior. Apparently his girlfriend at the time was unable to sleep in her cabin because she thought she was being watched by something outside her window. She said it was a very large black crow that would just sit by the window and stare at her, but in a strangely menacing way. Even when the blinds were closed, she'd open them back up hours later and it would still be there staring. She would sometimes see it in the forest, even during the day, sitting between the trees not making a sound and glaring at her, its gaze following her as she walked. She said it was the same crow. She was certain. Its eyes felt human, according to her. Well, those stories came up every couple of weeks like clockwork. Some kid would one day become distant and quiet, not wanting to leave their cabin for activities. Sometimes they'd ask to go home early. Most wouldn't say why. I think it was because they knew no one would believe them. But occasionally after prodding they would admit that they were afraid of something they were seeing in the forest and around their cabin. All of these kids described pretty much the same thing. And it wasn't just kids. Some of the other staff members claimed to have seen something similar as well. It was pretty easy to tell who was just making things up and who wasn't. The ones who I think really did see something did not want to talk about it. They were very bothered by what they had been experiencing. They'd have awful nightmares, and they wouldn't want to be outside for long. I've seen plenty of crows up there, but they were just crows. They'd flap around, squawk and stuff and that was it. I don't know why a crow would follow someone or stare at them for hours. That doesn't sound natural at all to me. I don't know what to make of it. It was such a silly story to hear the first time, but after hearing it again and again from people who have no way of knowing about it, you start to wonder, especially after seeing how upset these people are. They didn't seem to be faking it for attention. It ruined their entire week. I have 3 stories. 1 or 2 might be supernatural and 1 is just terrifying. First, the terrifying one. Right after our child was born, we moved to a rental house right at the edge of a rough neighborhood. We knew about the area but we were just about broke at the time. In the middle of the night, someone started banging on our door, swearing at us and telling us to let them in. We had one of those little windows near the top of the door, so I could see there was a man out there but could only see a little part of him without him being able to see me. Eventually he stopped. We woke up to cops outside our house. It seems after he couldn't get in, he called a taxi, held it up, and killed the driver. The second story is possibly supernatural. When I was dating my wife, I'd often stop by her house before she got off work and hang out until she got home. I'd watch TV, hang out with her pug, and nap. It just made sense as I worked about 10 minutes from her house. Well, I came in one day and let the dog out and back in and proceeded to go to the bathroom. While I was in there I heard 2 very loud sets of footsteps walking up from the basement. I then heard the door open and shut. I could even feel the vibration of their steps coming up the stairs and hear muffled talking. But then complete silence. No outside doors being opened or anything. The dog didn't bark either. I jumped up and opened the door a minute later and the door to the basement was shut and locked, as were all of the other doors. To make it worse, the lock on the basement was just one of those latches that you flip down and you can only lock it from the basement side. The house was empty other than me and the dog. The last story was in a completely different house. Our kid was now about 5. I woke up in the middle of the night standing beside my bed screaming like a banshee. My wife was doing the same thing on her side of the bed and we were both looking at the door. I heard my daughter screaming in her room across the hall but I couldn't see her from where I was. At some point I stopped and asked my wife what was wrong. She said she saw a man stealing our kid out of her room. In my mind I had been seeing the same thing. Obviously this wasn't the case because our kid was screaming in her room because she woke up to her 2 weirdo parents screaming. I guess one of us had a night terror and set everyone else off, but it was so weird that we saw the same thing in our minds. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I was leaving home on a beautiful spring day and I was about to enter the vehicle to fire her up and back out of the driveway when I looked across the street and saw a lone man of advanced age precariously jogging along perpendicular to our driveway in a haphazard manner on the sidewalk, as if he was running to keep himself from falling. As soon as I noticed this and before I could take any action or do anything other than make the observation or deduce this man might be in need of help or come to any conclusion like this of any sort, the poor guy was pretty much coming up to the corner end of the sidewalk across the street, which had soft, rounded sidewalk curves. He fell and tumbled head first into the concrete gutter. I ran over to this poor soul's injured body to see if I could help him and by this time our neighbors ran out to meet me and they called first responders, and quickly other neighbors, pensioners, and the like came running outside. There was nothing we could really do. I watched helplessly as I saw this man lying there, clearly injured, and I instantly began feeling guilty that I didn't summon some sort of Superman-like speed and agility that would have enabled me to immediately gather that this man was in mortal dire straits and run across the street to try and help him catch his gait the mere seconds previously when I had seen him in his haggard jog. We waited until first responders were on the scene quickly, as we lived a stone's throw from a hospital, and all I could do was pray that this man would be okay. I left to go to work after the scene had dissipated. Fast forward a year or so and some lady knocks on the door asking about what I had seen that day, claiming to be this man's relative. I shared the same story as above pretty much and asked what happened to him, and she told me he passed away after this incident. I offered my condolences but gathered this person felt like they were running around looking for someone to blame. Later I shared how I felt sadness for this tragedy with my mom and she reassured me that there was nothing I could have done, and it sounded like this person should not have been in the state he was when I noticed him. She alluded to how his caretakers weren't doing their job. There was no one chasing after him in this ordeal. Just a random elderly person awkwardly jogging along as if to keep jogging merely to not fall, only to reach the bend in the sidewalk at the corner of the block across the street, only to fall to his death. Life is so fragile. When I was a kid in NYC, my mom and I used to take the train or bus whenever we traveled. You can imagine the weird stuff I've encountered during my childhood, but one event really sticks out to me. This homeless woman who appeared to be under the influence of some sort of hard drug stepped onto the train I was on. She started yelling about random stuff as crackheads are known to do from time to time, so it was nothing too worrying. But then she stopped and started laughing directly at me. Then, while maintaining eye contact, she urinated on herself and said something along the lines of, "Those dreams are never gonna stop." I had been suffering from a recurring nightmare for years to that point and would wake up crying, sometimes without me even realizing it. It scared the life out of me. It was probably a lucky guess, but man did that stuff stick with me. The nightmares did stop eventually though, so she can go screw herself. Last summer, my little boy, who was 3.5 at the time, and I moved to Idaho. My brother had moved his family up about 3 years back and had offered us a place to stay as I searched for a home of our own. This is rural, farmland Idaho, where potato, sugar beet, and alfalfa fields are stretched for miles. Dairies, big and small, are scattered all over the place. Some are so big they look like a small town at night. There are multi-generational families, ranchers, and cowboys overseeing all of this. The particular county that we were in had around 5,000 residents, the majority living in rural areas within the county, the rest residing within one of its 3 small towns. The largest had approximately 1,200 residents, the next had 500, give or take, and the third had about 300. This was a very small town, where everyone knows everyone and everyone knows everything about each other. The homes in town were old, many built 100 years ago or more. My son and I spent a lot of time at a small, family-owned restaurant in the next town over. We became friends with the owner and her family. They had all been born and raised in the area and their family had been there for generations. This woman inherited the small restaurant from her parents along with the family home. It was back in the town where I had been searching for rentals. One day while talking to a couple of the waitresses, one of them blurted out to the other, "Hey, what about Jane's place? Maybe she'd rent it to them." The other waitress's eyes got real big as she snapped back, "No, no way." I asked why and was told, "Because it's haunted." At the time, I would say that I believed in a lot of things, many unusual, not mainstream things, and I held a firm belief that anything is possible. Ghosts, however, had never been on my radar. I had never experienced one and wasn't concerned with them. I did need to find a place and this sounded like the perfect opportunity. A few days later I met Jane's 2 adult daughters at the home to view it. The moment that I walked into the house I knew, or could feel, something was there, something that didn't want company. It was still full of old furniture and knickknacks. One of the girls said that their grandfather had lived here, alone, while the alcoholic grandmother lived in a room above the tiny restaurant she owned in the other town. Apparently they didn't care for each other and he had died alone in this home. I asked the girls if they had fond memories of holidays and get-togethers here. They looked puzzled by the question, looked at each other, then one answered, "No, not really." As I looked around, I noticed that the living room stretched into the dining area, essentially making a big rectangle. There was an oddly placed door in the middle, which I thought could be a closet. I opened the door and found that it was a small bedroom. It was in the center of the house, had no windows, and had a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling with a pull chain. There was an old, 1800s looking, full-size bed to my left. It was a cotton-filled mattress sitting on top of an exposed metal spring set. It truly looked like something you would see in an old western or maybe a ghost town. It was creepy and had a dark, not welcome here, vibe to it. One of the girls then said, "This was our grandpa's room." I wasn't about to take a single step inside and I backed up and shut the door. I decided to keep looking for a different place. A couple of weeks later, circumstances came about that I needed a temporary place to stay for a few nights. Jane told me that the back door was open and that we could stay in her dad's house. My son and I showed up late in the afternoon. It was early July, 100 degrees outside, and there was no way to cool the inside of the home. We went from room to room getting the layout before sitting down for some Netflix on our iPads. The sun was setting and in a couple of hours it would cool down enough for us to sleep. About 9:30 p.m. I got up from the couch that we were sitting on to go to the bathroom. I had to walk across the living area and when I came by the door to Grandpa's room I stopped. Out of respect, I grabbed the old doorknob and pulled the ancient wooden door shut. It wasn't easy. It was swollen and snug in the frame and I had to twist the knob to get it to shut. Once it did, I gave it the old shake and push test and verified that it was shut and latched. I then continued into the bathroom, washed my hands, and walked back out. This took about a minute or so. When I walked out, My son had gotten up off the couch and was silently standing with his iPad near my end of the room, next to the door. As I stepped toward him, I saw that the door was open, not fully, but with about a 4-inch gap. Before I could say or ask anything to my son, he said to me, "That door just opened, Daddy." I didn't know what to say. This wasn't something that he would have randomly come up with, and his little fingers, at 3.5 years old, could not have twisted the knob and opened the door. This was his truth. Then, really calmly, he said to me, "There's zombies in there." We left the following morning. Back in college, a buddy of mine and I were very into paranormal stuff and loved researching and investigating supposedly haunted locations. My friend was talking to this girl he liked, and she told him that there was an old abandoned house not too far from her parents' house out in the country and that we should investigate it. We were totally down, so one night, the two of us and a couple more buddies went to this house. On the way we picked up this girl and we met her father, who was a volunteer firefighter, and said that there was a fire in the house that killed the baby of the family that lived there. He helped fight the fire and said that afterwards the family just abandoned the place and it had sat vacant for months. We were very intrigued, so we made our way to the house. Once we got there we confirmed that there had been a bad fire and the family had just left everything. We made our way through the house and things just started feeling really sad. The girl and the other friends we were with started feeling weird, so they went back to the car. My friend and I made our way to the baby's room, and once we walked in we noticed a perfectly white wedding dress floating in the room next to the crib, and then all of a sudden we heard a baby start crying. We were frozen with fear and I literally couldn't move. The crying continued for about a minute and then reality and logic set in and I started wondering if there was actually a real baby somewhere. We started frantically looking and I realized that it was coming from under the floor. I rushed outside, and as I was approaching the crawl space under the baby's room a figure crawled out from under the house and started running towards me. I was literally like, what the heck is going on? I shined my flashlight at the figure's face and recognized him. It was the father of the girl. It was all a prank. After my heart rate dropped we laughed it off. Even though it turned out to all be fake, it was still some of the creepiest events I've witnessed firsthand. A large black van with tinted windows was following me and the group of other kids I was with, including my little sister. It was winter, I think a no-bus day, and we were in Canada, so needless to say it was snowy. Some other kids and I, including my sister, and our babysitter still wanted to go on a walk, so we put on all our snow stuff and began walking. At one point, my sister pointed out a black van slowly driving a bit behind us. I think we were a group of 5 or 6. And most of us were around 10 years old, except for my sister, who would have been around 7. We just assumed they were driving slowly because of the road and looking for a house or something, but we still ran as best we could. Anyone who has tried to run in full winter gear knows how hard it is, until we couldn't see the van anymore, and we continued walking. A minute later, my sister pointed out the van again, and it was pretty much the exact distance behind us that it was before we ran. At this point we were a little weirded out but thought we were just walking slowly, so it caught up. So we ran again, farther this time, and kept looking back. I think I remember looking back and seeing nothing, and then looking back a few seconds later to see the van was there again. At this point, we were all freaked out and I remember just having a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach seeing it again. We all began running like our lives depended on it because, in our minds, they did. My sister was the slowest and one of the larger and older boys had to pull her along so she didn't get left behind. I remember looking back and seeing the van speeding up a bit, still at a distance, but clearly trying to keep up with us. It felt like we were running for ages, but we finally reached the babysitter's house, ran up the stairs, slammed the door shut, and caught our breath. We told her what had happened, but I don't think she believed us. I remember me and another girl who was in the group seeing the same van drive by the window at least once. I think it was twice though. I don't know, it might have been nothing that our brains twisted into something. But, about a decade later, I still can't shake the feeling that the van was bad news and that we were all lucky it was noticed in time. When I was a kid, maybe about 7, my parents went on a quick store run and left me at home alone, normal in my small country town back then. I was a little rock hound and had a collection that I often enjoyed playing with. As I sat behind our living room couch, our black cat was passing by me, and as it got to the end of the couch where it could see into the living room area, the cat's hair all stood straight up and it started hissing aggressively as if it was either super angry or scared. So naturally I leaned over to look around the couch and I saw large footprints pressing into the carpet, walking through the living room, down the hall, and into my parents' room. I froze and stayed that way until my parents got home, and of course I told them instantly. They assured me everything was okay. Maybe 10 years later I learned that 2 weeks prior to me seeing this, my stepdad had witnessed it as well when he was home alone. Still gives me goosebumps thinking back to it. That was the first experience of what ended up being several years of being haunted by something. In the moment it wasn't creepy or scary, but in hindsight it is absolutely terrifying. Not just because of what happened but what could have happened. I don't remember exactly when it was, but I was between 6 and 12 years old, because it was when I was walking home from my first school. To get a better picture, my house was at the middle of a stretch of dirt road in the middle of a wheat field, with long rows of trees splitting the different properties. At the time there wasn't anything growing there. On my way home one day, I noticed the most stereotypical white van you can imagine behind one of the rows of trees, making it obscured from the main road. It confused me, and for some reason my first thought was, maybe they need help. So I, dumb as I was, just walked up and called out, "Excuse me." No response, but what sounded like a woman screaming incoherently could be heard. I called again, "Excuse me, do you need help?" A rough middle-aged man's voice came from inside the back through the open passenger window. "No, go away." I asked again, "Are you sure?" He responded, "Yes, go away." And so I did, never thought to mention it, never told anyone, and didn't think about the situation at all until like 4 years ago, when it hit me like a dump truck, what the heck was actually going on then. I have absolutely no idea who they were or what happened, or if either of them were in the news as missing people, kidnapping, murder, etc. No clue. I just know that whatever was happening might have been prevented or helped if I had known any more about such a situation. I hope to everything that is good that it was just two people getting busy and I am imagining the screaming. But if not, I'm just grateful he made me go away and didn't capture me too. My friend and I pulled into a public park way out in the country around midnight on a snowy New Year's Eve to smoke some weed, eat some snacks, and wait for our friends to return from a party. As my friend was smoking on the pipe, I looked out the car window into the night. As I mentioned, we were way out in the country, so the only light was from the moon, and it was illuminating the snow-covered ground just enough that I could see the whole parking lot, which was empty, and the edge of the forest. As I was looking out the window, I was startled to see movement across the white snow. There were two figures walking along the edge of the forest. At first I thought they were animals, but I got goosebumps as I realized they were men. I told my friend we should leave immediately. I was legitimately scared because we were in the middle of nowhere. But right at that moment a cop car came driving up the access road toward us. I looked back toward the forest and the figures were gone. The cop drove up and asked us what we were doing, so we nervously told him the truth, that we were just hanging out waiting for some friends. We were scared he was going to write us a ticket for being in the park after hours or even arrest us because we smelled like weed. But he didn't do either of those things. He was looking for a couple of guys who might have headed this way, and he wanted to know if we had seen them. I told him I saw two men at the edge of the forest and that they seemed to have walked into the woods just before he arrived. As soon as I said that, he let us be and went back to his car. Fully spooked, my friend drove us out of there, and we met up with our other friends at one of our parents' houses about a mile or two away. As soon as we got there we told everyone about the creepy encounter we had just had, but it wasn't over. We went out on the back patio to smoke cigarettes, and I panicked as I saw yet another figure emerging from the darkness, crunching through the moonlit snow. It was the same county deputy we had talked to a mile or two away in the park. It really freaked me out because I had never seen a cop in that area my whole life, much less in someone's private backyard. We were all taken aback but intensely curious as to what was going on. When he came up to us, he asked us if we had seen the two guys come through the area. We hadn't and told him so. We asked him what was going on and why he was looking for those guys, but he didn't provide any details. He just wished us a good night and walked back into the darkness toward his vehicle. To this day, I have no idea who those guys were, why they were walking through the woods, in total darkness with no flashlights, or why the cop was trying to track them down.